Alright, it's time for another update and forecast for the park fire. Main reason I'm doing this video is because the situation has changed, especially on the northern edge of the fire here. So earlier this morning, remember how we weren't seeing much heat on this side? You notice just those two little red stars near Inskip Hill? Well, it looks like those have now turned into spot fires, and my main concern is that when we look at the structures right here, see all the structures to the northeast of Inskip Hill? Well, my concern is that the southwesterly winds, you can see the wind direction right now, is going to push those spot fires towards those structures. So I think the best thing we can do right now is actually take a look at what Watch Duty was saying, because that kind of summarizes it. It says radio traffic indicates that fire activity on the northern section of the fire near Lanes Valley Road has picked up and is expected to impact Lanes Valley Road north of Inskip Hill. Additional ground and air resources have been requested to that area. Additionally, activity has increased in the Little Giant Mill Road area near Highway 36 with an approximate 40-acre slop over that additional copters have been requested to help work. So then it shows that view right there, and we can actually take a look at that. So I'll show on the map what we're looking at right here. So we've got Paynes Creek right there, our cameras, and then we're going to have Manton and Shingletown up towards the northeast and the north of these cameras. So looking at Inskip Hill, let's check out maybe we'll look at the last 6 hours here, because right there you can actually see it looks like where some of those little spot fires start. Looks like there's a number of them. Basically what's happening is the burning embers are being picked up, dropped into these dry fuels. You can see that they did have a retardant line there in the past, but then that doesn't really help if you have a burning ember that gets picked up by the winds, dropped into these dry fuels, and then ends up catching. You look at that little spot right there, how quickly that turns into a much larger plume, and then the winds start pushing that. Now, if you look closely, you can actually see how hard they're hitting it with air attack. Looks like we have another spot right there. You'll notice these little red streaks going across the front of the fire right here. So it does look like there's enough heat being generated by this fire that a lot of the smoke is going up in the air instead of directly kind of diagonal or across the ground. So the one silver lining of that is they are still able to get some air attack in there, so it's not too smoky just yet. But, I mean, you look at that, and what started as a tiny little spot now looks to be definitely picking up in activity. And again, the wind direction would be trying to push this towards Manton and Shingletown. So the main reason I wanted to go live right here is because that was an area of the fire that we weren't all that concerned about this morning, because it looked like a lot of the heat had died down. But now if I click the current satellite, keep in mind this is going to over-exaggerate how much fire activity is on the fire, but it does give us an indication of where there's heat coming off of it at the moment. And every time I've looked at this, it does increase, like those little boxes right there increase. It started off as just one little box, now it's up to 4. Basically that just means there's more heat coming off of the fire. And then it's not just this northern side, it looks like the northeastern shoulder is picking up as well. That's a part of the fire that is really going to be tested today, because if we look at the perimeter only, they did this big firing operation to basically try to clear out some of the fuels right here to keep it from moving farther towards the northeast. If we look at the Modus and Veers, still not seeing much heat past that firing operation, which is good news. But if we turn on the current satellites, that definitely looks like it's one of the areas of the fire where we're seeing, I would say, the largest amount of heat at the moment. It's that corner, that area right there, there's northeastern kind of, I don't know what to call that, maybe the shoulder of the fire, and then those new spots up there, as well as a spot on the west side. But last I heard from CAL FIRE, it sounded like they were getting some decent work done on that spot. But now I would say this one on the northern side has turned into the top priority right there. So taking another view of this, so now we're going to take a view from, I believe, this Shingletown, and this is going to be looking down directly towards Inskip Hill right here. So if we look at that, let's maybe check out 3 hours. 3 hours, it just looked like there was some smoke in the area. And then you're going to see when that spot fire starts. You can actually see in Skip Hill right there. And my main concern with this camera is the fact that the smoke is going directly towards the camera. So that would mean the winds are going directly towards Shingletown. And then you have Manton somewhere in between here, but you can't really see it too well on this camera. So just kind of looking at that one again, just in case you missed it. That spot starts around Lanes, what is it? So I want to make sure I get the words right. Lanes Valley Road. And when we were looking at it on this map in here, this is, I think, the best map I could find that shows kind of where some of the towns are in relation to the fire perimeter. So we have Manson up there. He's going to be in Skip Hill. But it wasn't showing where Lanes Valley Road was. I believe, oh, there it is. So Lanes Valley Road is right on this northeastern part of Skip Hill. You can see how the fuels do change once you get to the bottom of the hill. So it's going to be interesting to see how the fire activity changes as it continues to push down, because if we look at this view right here, this looks like it's still in a lot of the actually pretty heavily fueled area. That's going to be basically everything, mix of grass, brush, and timber. And then you can see where it looks like the fuels become a bit more sparse, but that is sometimes not always a good thing, because grass fires tend to move fairly quickly. So then if you have more grass down there, although it looks like it's a lot less fuel, it might not actually help us all that much once it continues to move down the hill. So just coming back to right here, zooming out, getting an idea of the fire. That actually might show where the spot fire is right there. I'm not sure how recent this fire perimeter is. Looks like there's also a spot right there. It seems like this camera angle, though, that shows the recent activity, that looks to be in that more green part of the fire. So I'm not thinking it's that spot. I'm thinking it's actually something down around here, because if we look at watch duty, it says northern section of the fire near Lanes Valley Road. And then if we scroll up to the most recent update, so this actually should have been the first one that I read, radio traffic indicates there is now multiple spots across Lanes Valley Road, with the largest being approximately 30 acres. Air and ground resources are aggressively engaging those spots. Additionally, the fire is also close to impacting 36 near Dale's Station area, and additional ground resources have been requested to that area as well. So now it sounds like there's multiple spots across Lanes Valley Road, and I would say you can actually see that on this imagery right here. There's one point where it actually, you see those, looks like multiple spots from that camera angle. And then there's one brief period where it kind of shifts its view to another spot right about there. So new spot establishing. And then that one doesn't seem to be growing as much. That one is definitely their main concern, where you can see that retardant being dropped pretty continually right there. Interested to see what kind of air resources we have on the northern part of the fire. So zooming in here, that's going to be that view from Skip Hill that we were just looking at. And it looks like the tanker 01 is about to drop some retardant as we speak. And if you look at some of the paths that are going on, gives you a good idea of where we're seeing that activity. So I'd imagine if we update this one, in about 10 minutes we'll be able to see that tanker come through, drop that retardant right there. So just reiterating, the reason I'm concerned about that spot right there is because we have Manton up here with all of these structures, and it actually looks like there are some structures between the fire and Manton. You see those little orange dots in there, and the green shows the wind direction. So that's, I'd say, what's most concerning about this. It wouldn't be all that bad if we had a northerly wind and it was just pushing this part of the fire back into the area that had already burned. But we have southwesterly winds, which is actually going to try to push this part of the fire towards Manton. Now, you can also take a look at, I want to see if it's showing up on the satellite. Yeah, it might be easier to see if just the smoke first. Yeah, you can actually see that little spot, those spot fires starting up on the north. You can actually see the one on the west side, the northwesterly side as well. Clearly, the most heat is coming off of the northeastern side, but I haven't really gone into that yet in this video. Maybe I should though, because see how much heat is coming off on that northeasterly side. The reason I didn't focus on that first is just because we don't have as many structures over here. I am expecting the largest amount of growth to be on that northeastern side though, because if we clean up this map a little bit, look at fire history, there's going to be no fire history in here within the last few decades. So that's a lot of fuels that haven't burnt out, or have they just been accumulating for the last few decades. And then we had a lot of heat at the beginning of July, which dried out a lot of the fuels, and there was actually more grass this winter because we had a wet winter. You'd think, oh, wet winter, we're going to be good for fire season, but as we've seen this year, it actually just made more grass, and then that grass dries out very quickly, especially when you have 3 of the hottest weeks on record with a heat wave that lasted more than, seemed like almost 2 weeks in some parts of California. And then, so you have abundant fuels, and then you have a lot of heat that dries out those fuels. And then I'd say the biggest factor we've seen on this fire has been the wind. And now the wind looks to be coming from a more southwesterly direction. Previous days it was almost more straight southerly. So what that's going to do is take all this heat right here and try to push it up towards 36. And then it's also going to take this shoulder of the fire. Again, we'll try to clean this up a little bit, looking at perimeters only. And it's going to try to take some of that heat and basically just push through where they did that good firing operation to try to kind of catch that shoulder of the fire. What the hope was is that this part of the fire would bump into their firing operation, or I should just say the little fuel break that they created here. It would bump into that, then all the fuels have already been burnt out, so then it stops. But I mean, if you look at how much heat is coming off of this side of the fire, I wouldn't be surprised if it's already crossed that. Now, I do have to use the disclaimer, this satellite imagery always over-exaggerates the fire growth. So from this view, it would look like it's already past that, but this is just the best information that we have to go off of. But to be honest, I would be surprised if the fire held within that firing operation throughout the day today, because if you look at the wind direction, it's straight from the southwest. So all it has to do is pick up a couple burning embers, toss them over the firing operation, and then it's free to just run through all of these fuels that, again, haven't been burned out in decades. So most of our fire activity right now is on that northeastern side of the fire. Let's see if I can zoom in more. No, it looks to be about as much as I can zoom in right there. Northeastern side of the fire, but the part of the fire I'm actually the most concerned about are those new little smoke plumes that you see coming off of the north. So I want to actually see, there's a few things I want to check up on. One, looking at the air attack on that spot. Let's update this because I think the last time I loaded that camera was about 30 minutes ago. So now let's look at last 3 hours. You see the spots develop, a few different spots in the area. It's going to zoom back over to the larger plume here. You'll be able to see a lot of the air attack coming in. The smoke going directly towards Manton and Shingletown. And let's see if their air attack seems to be working. Or, yeah, it looks like that is still progressing. What I was hoping is that they would have so much air attack on it that they'd basically be able to stop it in its tracks. But, I mean, when you have this much dry fuel and southwesterly winds, this is the same part of the fire where we saw it take off 10 to 15 miles over the course of an afternoon. And it's very similar fuels in this area to what it moved through previously. I guess the one thing working for us is that it's not as windy as those previous days. And, you can actually tell that from this imagery right here. Notice how the smoke isn't completely bent over. Some of that smoke is actually going, I wouldn't say straight up because it's clearly moving towards Shingletown over there, but it actually looks like the surface winds don't seem to be all that much because the wind is going more up. So I could actually draw on this instead of just saying things. So right there, it clearly looks like the smoke is being pushed towards Shingletown, which would be, I don't know, somewhere right around there. But a lot of the smoke is coming up. And if you had really strong winds along the surface, you wouldn't see that smoke going as straight up as it is. So that actually tells us that the winds aren't as bad as previous days. But to just prove that point, there's Manton right there. Here's going to be Inskip Hill. So our spot is probably going to be actually pretty close to, I have a feeling that's probably the closest weather station. That's showing winds right now around 19 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour, max temperature 89 degrees, I'll zoom in here, min relative humidity 22%. So, it's not as windy as previous days, but anything more than usually 17 miles per hour is going to allow the fire to move fairly quickly. And the winds that you need for a fire to move quickly decrease as your fuels get drier. Because when your fuels are exceptionally dry, what happens is the fire, when it gets to those fuels, it doesn't need to waste as much of its energy to evaporate the moisture out of the fuels, which would kind of decrease the fire activity because it's kind of using up its battery. You could think of it like that. But when the fuels are already dry, the fire gets to those fuels and then they're just ready to combust. And then the fire just keeps going. So since it's able to move faster through dry fuels, you don't need as strong of winds to continually push that fire. But 20 mile per hour gusts, that's certainly strong enough to continue to push it. I was trying to think of what direction it is, and we can actually see the direction right there. Yeah, that looks to be more southerly than the station directly below Manton. See that direction right there? It's going to be pointing up that way, which would take a hot spot and push it towards Manton. That one looks to be a little bit more southerly, but you do still see some southwesterly in that component right there. So I want to update watch duty. I want to make sure we don't miss anything here. And let's see if there's anything been recent. Looks like their last update was 37 minutes ago. And that was the one that we've already read. So zooming out here. Looks like they have a lot of air attack. Definitely focusing on this part of the fire. And the reason for that, just to reiterate again, we'll just go through this map. I'll show modus and veers. So here's our fire perimeter. This morning we didn't have that much heat on this northern side of the fire, and it sounded like they were pretty confident about Manton and Shingletown in the update this morning. But then if we actually zoom in here, you see these two little red dots. I wonder if that's some of that recent heat activity and some of those spot fires that have picked up. And the reason that's concerning is, see all those structures right there? That's Manton. We can actually measure. I want to do this before we turn on the other heat. So we've heard that it's crossed Lanes Valley Road, which I believe is going to be that road right there. So we have a number of spots across that. And that's actually 4 miles to Manton. So that's actually farther than I thought it was going to be. But that's still closer than we would want it, because in previous days, we have seen this fire move 8 to 10 miles in the course of a few hours and chew up 4,000 to 5,000 acres per hour. Now, I'm not saying that to alarm anybody, but I am kind of just saying that because it's the truth. And a lot of the fuels in this area are similar to the fuels that have already come through, or similar to the fuels that the fire has already gone through, and we've seen how aggressively it's pushed through those fuels. I guess if we need a silver lining after that kind of ominous declaration. It's that the winds at least aren't as strong as they were last Thursday and Friday. Last Friday we had 30-mile-per-hour gusts. Although I wouldn't say winds are exactly good news right now, because we looked at that station on the ground. It looks like it's around 20 miles per hour closest towards Inskip Hill. Although, I mean, you look at that one, which is also, it looks like the eastern side of Inskip Hill, that's showing max gusts around 13 miles per hour. That's not bad. And then that one just south of Manton, that actually shows a max gust of 20, but that red value right there is going to be your most recent wind, and that's going to be 13. So I actually want to click into this station and see what's going on with the wind. It looks like it was strongest around 4:30, and sustained winds around 5, gust around 12. So overall, winds aren't as bad on the fire as what we saw last Friday, which is why that smoke plume is going as vertical as it is. But I would say the most concerning thing is the direction that the wind is coming from, because it's going to try to take this hot spot that's about to show up right here, those new spot fires that have started, and you look at the wind direction, those green kind of dashes, and that's going to try to push that hot spot basically directly towards Manton. Now, I will say on this one, this is going to be a 3-hour loop right here. And although you see a number of different spots, it doesn't look like it's moving that fast, to be honest. It certainly seems like it's chewing up a lot of fuel. But, I mean, over a 3-hour time span, it didn't look like that, where that smoke plume was coming from, was actually changing all that much. And actually, it looks like in the last 10 minutes, some of that smoke seems to die down a little bit. So maybe the air attack seems to be working here. I'm going to just update this again. Let's go to the last hour. So a lot of smoke coming up an hour ago. And then watch what happens in the last 15 minutes. Right there. I mean, that certainly looks like less smoke coming off of the fire to me, which makes me think that some of that air attack is working. And on this northern side of the fire, you can see how heavily they've been hitting it right there. That's the camera we were just looking at. So you can see kind of what's going on there. We've got Little Inskip Hill. We're looking up. There's Lanes Valley Road. And then they've just been dumping lots of retardant on that side of the fire. So, I don't know, that latest view right there, I would say, is actually, I would say, encouraging, but what is discouraging is if we look at the view from Shingletown. I'll just show on the map where this is from. Shingletown. Now this camera is going to be looking basically through just to the west of Manton here. And then that's the previous camera that we're just looking at. So it's going to be looking back down at the hotspot. So let's look at the last 3 hours on this one. Starts off, not much going on. That goes along with what we were saying this morning about how there was some heat on the fire, but it was more on the northeastern side, and we weren't actually seeing that much on the north. Then this little spot fire kicks up. And the key thing I want to point out about this camera angle is this: you never want to see the smoke coming directly at the camera, especially if the camera is in an area that has a large amount of structures. So just going back here to show what we're looking at. There's Manton, Shingletown up here. Our camera is going to be somewhere in that direction, somewhere around here, looking at that hotspot. And the point I was making is, you never want to see the smoke coming at the camera, because that means the winds are coming at the camera. And then if the camera is in those structures, that means the fire is moving closer towards a large amount of structures. And then, so Manton is most likely on somewhere around on this left side of the screen. So that's the northern side of the fire. I don't want to completely ignore the northeastern side. So, and it could be good to just maybe give that maybe 5 minutes to see if this smoke continues to decrease, as it seems to be doing in the last maybe 10 to 20 minutes. So we'll maybe do a quick detour to talk about the northeastern side of the fire real quickly. Although, before I get into that, maybe I should just calm anybody's fears if they're in, let's say, Chico, Paradise, Magalia, or Forest Ranch. If you look at the wind direction, it's coming almost straight south on the southern edge of the fire. It seems to be more southwesterly on the northern half of the fire. So if you're in Paradise, Chico, Magalia, Forest Ranch, this wind direction is exactly the kind of wind that you would want to see. It's pushing the fire away from you. And I've clicked on all satellites here, so it's showing the current heat detections, and we're really not seeing any heat on the southern edge of the fire. I also like to see that unburned island in Cohasset. That was encouraging to see. And again, just because all of those structures are within the fire perimeter doesn't mean that they've all been destroyed. I actually looked at the most recent numbers from CAL FIRE, and for the first time ever, I've seen this number actually decrease. Usually throughout the lifetime of a fire, every time you check structures destroyed, it just continues to increase. But this went from 134 to 109. So that was great to see there. And again, Forest Ranch, Magalia, Paradise, Chico, all look to be pretty much in the clear. I shouldn't say in the clear, definitely shouldn't say in the clear, but in a good position today compared to areas north and northeast of the fire. Now we do also have that little spot, or that increase in activity on the northwestern edge. I haven't really talked about that at all. The main reason I haven't talked about that much is because the largest amount of structures closest to that are, we'll just go from right there to right there. That's going to be about 7 miles away, and the wind is coming a bit more southerly on the western side of the fire, so that's going to take that and actually just push it directly towards the north. So that's not really threatening these structures on the western side of the fire. The structures that are closest to being threatened right now it actually does look like there's a few orange dots around Lanes Valley Road, and then Manton right here with the southwesterly winds that are trying to push that hotspot towards those structures. So just coming back here, actually I think we could see Lanes Valley Road on this one. Just updating the northern side one more time. Here's the fire. Zoom in here, and we've gotten reports that there are spots across Lanes Valley Road. The last time that we looked at it, it seems like one of those spots, they've just been blasting it with air attack, and it actually looks like it's decreasing in activity. So I like to see that. But back over to the northeastern side. That was a bit of a kind of tangent there when I was planning to talk about this. That's clearly where you do see the largest amount of heat. And even just in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we've seen the heat pick up on this shoulder of the fire. So where the previous fire perimeter was right there. And that looks like a pretty weird fire perimeter, but that's actually their burn operation that came through. Started, I want to see, I believe they connected that with 32. Yeah, so if you look closely right there, you have 32 running right there. And then basically they light the fire, it backs down the hill, clears out those fuels. So then when the fire bumps into that area, the fuels have already been burnt out. And they're hoping it'll just be able to kind of fill in right there, catch it, and then wouldn't grow much more. But this northern side right here looks to be quite active. And to be honest, I haven't heard any reports that it's crossed 32. And I think they would say that on watch duty if it had. So for right now, I'm going to say that this is still holding. But it wouldn't... I'd be honestly surprised if it does hold throughout the rest of the day today, because all it's going to take is a couple burning embers to go over that, create some spot fires. I'd imagine they would get air attack on it very quickly, but this is where it becomes challenging when you have such a large wildfire is you can't have endless resources on every part of the fire. So then you have to make some trade-offs. And if they're focusing their resources right now, I would imagine they'd be focusing it as much as they could on this northern side, because we have all of those structures in Manton that have the winds pushing that part of the fire directly towards them. Now, I don't have to just speculate. We can actually look at where a lot of the air attack is right now. Looks like they have a few helicopters. Interesting. So it looks like these helicopters, I love this feature right here where you can see where they've been flying. So if you think of that heat right there as the previous firing operation, so that orange right there actually isn't bad news, that is good news. That's fire we've purposely put on the ground to clear out some fuels. And then the concern previously is that, oh, well, the fire could still sneak around this little corner right here where it hasn't been connected, because you could think that you would have heat on the fire right there. Perhaps I could turn on Modus and Veers. No, that didn't really help us much. Perimeters only. So what I was thinking is, it's a shame that it doesn't connect all the way, and 32 does connect all the way. So there's that little patch where I was afraid that it would still be able to push right over 32 right there. It's basically they tied in the fire with 32 all the way down here, but then we have that area that hasn't been burnt out. But then if we look at where the air attack seems to be, look at the helicopters. Looks like they're dropping right on that area around 32 to make it so that it can't go through that area that hasn't been burnt out towards Butte Meadows. And then showing Butte Meadows on this map, that's going to be those structures that you see right there. So, yeah, good to see that there are some helicopters on this eastern side of the fire, and they're just doing those perfect drops right where you'd want them to basically keep the fire from moving closer towards Butte Meadows. So, seems like most of the growth I'd be expecting today would be on this little northern, I shouldn't call that northern, it's that little eastern shoulder right there. So, coming back here, let's see how much heat's coming off of that part of the fire right now. Again, it's going to over-exaggerate the heat, but it is useful to look at. And once again, it seems like every time we update this, there seems to be more heat coming off of the fire right there. And the wind direction, I'll flash the winds on and off. Notice it's coming from the southwest. It's going to try to push this fire just directly into this area right here. So we haven't actually looked at a camera on this side of the fire yet. Before we look at the camera, let's look at it from space. Clearly, northeastern section is the more active part of the fire right now. Area I'm most concerned about still is that little spot, or the number of spots that have crossed Lanes Valley Road on the northern side. But the northeastern portion has significantly picked up in activity today. And it's, it's a shame, or it's a bummer that it's gotten hot, dry, and it seems like decently windy again. We're not as windy, we're not as hot, we're not as dry as last Thursday, Friday, but we're hotter, drier, and windier than we were, let's say, on Saturday. Saturday was when we had that great break, and they took advantage of it. They were able to get that firing operation that we were looking at in, and they were able to go direct on that northern side of the fire around Shingletown, or closer towards Manton. Like if we look at the Modus and Veers from earlier today, we weren't seeing really any heat on this northern side of the fire, just those two little red stars right there. And they took advantage of that cooler, more moist weather, and they're feeling pretty confident on this northern side. But then all it really takes is a few little burning embers to drop down once it gets hotter and drier, like we're seeing this afternoon. And then all of a sudden, you got one of those spot fires that starts to take off again. And the northern side, which in my video this morning, I was thinking, actually a lot more confident about the northern side than in previous videos. Now it looks like we're starting to see Manton in a bit more danger than it looked like they were going to be in this morning. And just zooming in there, there's Lanes Valley Road. That goes along with this camera that I am showing right there. And that's where there's been a number of spots across Lanes Valley Road. And then zooming out, you have Manton up towards the northeast. The reason that's concerning is because the winds are coming from the southwest. And we did look at some of the stations on the ground. This one on the northern side of Inskip Hill, we've seen some gusts around 20 miles per hour. And then temperature around 90, minimum relative humidity around 22%. But potentially the silver lining, if we look more south of Manton, winds right now are showing 11 miles per hour. We did have a max gust around 20. And then on the east side of Inskip Hill, 13 mile per hour max gust. That we'll take that any day of the week. But max temperature around 90, minimum relative humidity around 20%. That's certainly hot and dry out there. Although I will say not as dry as we were last week. So winds, definitely a factor. It is good to see they're not stronger though. So the other thing that we wanted to do that we hadn't done yet is look at some of the actual cameras on this eastern side of the fire, because again, that looks to be where most of the heat is coming off at the moment. And again, we just looked at this about 4 minutes ago, and just in the last 4 minutes, we saw those two little red boxes pop up that weren't there before. So that seems to be clearly where most of the heat is coming. You see the little orange flash right here? Then you're going to see that orange right in this little corner right here. Keep an eye on that. It starts to glow a lot brighter. And then matching that up with here, that's going to be that corner right there where those two red squares just popped up. So southwesterly winds are going to try to continue to push that into all of these fuels right here. Now it does look like there's going to be some little patches in here where it's not completely continuous fuel, but there's still enough fuel in that area that the fire will be able to push through that fairly easily, especially with the wind, the heat, and the dry air. So now let's actually try to see if we can find a camera that looks at this. So let's show this on the map. This is going to be Colby Mountain 2. So if we come back to watch duty, is that this camera right here? Yeah, so that's Colby Mountain 2. It's going to be looking at that area and actually close to where we have that firing operation. And I wonder if that's actually what you can see at the bottom of this. It looks like I've seen a ton of the fuel get cleared out right there. That looks more like a dozer line though. And I actually did see some dozers on this earlier. But now let's look at it over the last, let's go 6 hours. Oh yeah, you can actually see the dozers doing their work right there. And then fire activity, this was the one camera this morning where it actually was showing activity. I looked at a number of them, and this one was the most active this morning, but as you'll see in the last hour or two, we'll wait for it. I'm actually watching this live with you for the first time. I'm expecting you'll see things pick up, though, as we get into the last hour. And, yep, right on cue. Looks like a bit more smoke coming off of it. Starts to look a bit thicker. Although, again, I maybe tend to be a bit too optimistic, but it's not as bad as we were last Thursday and Friday, so I guess that's something. It's definitely active there, though. It's just great to see all this fuel that's been cleared out between where we have this camera and where we see some of that fire activity. And then if we take another view, showing this one on the map, that's going to be Bald Mountain. So coming back to watch duty, is that this camera right here? Now that's Morgan Summit. Is it maybe this one? Stover Mountain? Now maybe watch duty doesn't have Bald Mountain showing up on here. So we're just gonna have to try to look at the map. There's Forest Ranch. There's Bald Mountain. Where's the other camera we were just looking at? So there's Cohasset Hill. That's the one we were just looking at. Cohasset Hill 1. And then this is going to be more from the east. Looking in. Maybe I'm just too zoomed in over here. Buck Lake. Nope, doesn't look like Watch Duty has it. So just think of a camera right maybe around here. Looking over towards Cohasset Hill, that previous camera. So this is going to be from the east looking at the fire. And let's take the last, we'll do 6 hours. We'll take a long view of it. Looks like the camera's spinning around for a while. Still spinning. And this is earlier in the day. First thing that I want to say, notice how much blue sky you're seeing. That's something that changed today as opposed to, let's say, Saturday. Sunday was kind of the transition day between the two, but Saturday we were kind of socked in with smoke. The winds calmed down, smoke settled over the fire. That limited the daytime heating because you don't get as much solar radiation reaching the surface if your sky is covered with smoke. But look how blue the sky is today. So all that heat is just able to hit the surface, dries out the fuels even more, and then makes things hotter, makes things drier. Usually when things get hotter and drier, that's when you get larger temperature gradients, like for example, in your valleys versus your hill slopes. So then that creates lots of little local winds going on. 1 second. Just wanted to clean up the chat real quick. Yeah, when you have clear skies, it's going to get hotter, drier, and then that's actually going to drive your local winds, especially in canyons, for example. And then that's going to lead to more fire activity, and then your fire activity can then lead to more winds as well because you get all this rising motion right there, and then you get winds rushing in to take its place. Again, the optimist in me, though, it's still not as bad as we've seen in previous days. In previous days, that smoke plume would be going out of the camera shot, it seems like. Although the realist in me does say you can see that it's picked up in the last hour or two. It was just sort of chugging along throughout most of the day, and then you're going to start to see it punch up a bit more. That means it's getting into some heavier fuels, creating a lot of heat, and then that heat makes the air less dense, and then that's going to push it up towards the north. And no worries, Robert. You and Lucy are great moderators on this channel. You guys have been here since, I think, day one with me. I think we've been doing this since maybe 2020. I think it was August 17th when all those fires started around during the lightning complexes. LNU complex, CZU, SCU. Those are my first wildfire forecast videos. And yeah, again, it seems like Robert and Lucy have been there since the very beginning. So yeah, thanks for being such great moderators on this channel. And it's interesting, somebody in the chat just said spotting in paradise. If we look here, we can see if any heat is popping up on this camera. It has current heat detections on, but it's not showing anything. And to be honest, I'd be surprised if that were the case, because we have those southwesterly winds and not much heat on this whole side of the fire recently. So a burning ember would have to maybe go from your fire perimeter against the winds into paradise. So don't know if that would be credible information. Where we do have some spot fires, though, is this northern side of the fire. And I should just continually come back up here because that's the main kind of concern on this fire right here. because we have Manton up towards the northeast and southwesterly winds blowing that hot spot towards Manton. Now, we haven't checked the camera in probably 10 to 15 minutes. So let's look at it again. I think that's going to be some good news for us. Let's look at the last 3 hours here. There's some spots. And then we had this larger spot. And then a lot of smoke coming off of it. You're going to see all the retardant that they're dropping just in front of it, though. Smoke plume, for the most part, actually going straight up, which tells us the winds aren't as strong as previous days. And then in the last 10 to 15 minutes, it's looking better right there. That's pretty amazing. I mean, I don't want to say that we're good on this side of the fire, because it's certainly still my main concern. But the fact that this thing hasn't just taken off towards Manton with these southwesterly winds, with all this dry, abundant fuel, let's see if there's any fire history. No, there's no fire history here in the last few decades. So the fact that their air attack has been able to take what was quite an active spot fire, there was actually a number of spot fires in this area. Again, zooming out, Manton, northern half of the fire in Skip Hill. And then we had reports of a number of spot fires across Lanes Valley Road right there. And that's going to be a lot of the same type of fuel that this fire was burning 4,000 to 5,000 acres per hour in over the last couple of days. And then if we look at the last 3 hours on one of those spot fires, it looks like it barely moved at all. And then now it actually looks like there's less smoke coming off of it. So, pretty amazing work done right there. I'm interested to see if there's still some, more and more air attack on that eastern side of the fire. I'll try to keep more of a direct line of thought, but I'm easily distracted. So, a lot of helicopters over here on the eastern side, basically tying in that previous firing operation to 32 to try to keep it out of Butte Meadows. Just the fact that we have all those helicopters over there tells me that we've held it to that point up until now. So let's keep an eye on that side of the fire. We're also keeping an eye on this northeastern shoulder, because that's where the most heat, the most smoke is coming off of it right now. I'd say still, even though we're seeing less smoke on these spot fires up here, it is still my main concern. But look at it right now. You got 3 planes and an air tanker going directly where that spot fire is. You can see, if you look at the flight paths of a lot of these, they've just been hitting that spot fire nonstop since it started. And we can actually see when it started. Let's close that out. I actually should always make sure to update Watch Duty every 10 minutes just to make sure we don't miss any updates here. So, clicking down here, Park Fire, updated 2 minutes ago. So we do have a recent update. I don't think I've said this in the video yet, but make sure if you are in an evacuation order, that means leave immediately. Evacuation warning means get ready to leave. Although at this point, pretty much everyone in California should probably have a go bag ready just in case. So I'll let you look at the northern side of the fire, just swarming with air attack right now on those spot fires. Love to see that. But I want to read what this most recent update was. So the one that we had read about an hour ago was it said, radio traffic indicates there is now multiple spots across Lanes Valley Road. We can look at that over here. Northern part of the fire, Manton. Oops, zoomed in a bit too much. Lanes Valley Road right there. So we're getting spots across that. That's what we're seeing in this video right here. And then continuing, with the largest being approximately 30 acres, that's probably the one we were just looking at on the camera. Air and ground resources are aggressively engaging those spots. I'd say that's an understatement, seeing how many air attack we have swarming around there. And then even in the video, you can, if you look really closely here, you'll be able to see some of the retardant actually being dropped. Let's see. Oh, yep, right there. You probably saw that quick red streak. And then I wonder if the update is going to be that the situation's improving. Because look at the smoke. Much less smoke in the last 10 to 20 minutes. But now, actually looking at the most recent update, now it's saying 13 minutes ago. The spot fire previously noted across Lanes Valley Road is approximately 200 acres in grass per air attack. So it went from 30 acres to 200 acres. So based on that report, that would be bad news. And I mean, what I'm hoping is that this isn't like a smaller spot fire and there's actually a larger 200 acre spot fire somewhere else. But I'd imagine if there was, the camera would pick up on it, because we zoom in here. The camera that we're looking at is this one in Skip Hill. And that's the same camera shot that we were just looking at, but additional camera, so camera 2. Yeah, you know, we haven't looked at camera 2. Let's actually check it out. Co-located camera. Let's look at the last 3 hours. Oh, it's going to be one of those spinners. Interesting. So these definitely look more threatening than that other spot fire we were looking at. You notice the little pyrocumulus on the top. Anytime you see that, that means there's a lot of heat coming up. Okay, so I was starting to feel better on the northern side because that one spot looked like it was decreasing in activity. But I mean, if we reload this again, look at the last 3 hours, click into here, this is showing a lot more activity than those other spots. So if we come back here, just trying to piece together all this different information that we have, I wonder if kind of that yellow box is that one spot fire that seems to be decreasing in activity, and that red box is this new view right here. Or if the cameras are so good that it's actually looking all the way across this northern edge of the fire, and it's actually just picking up on all the heat that we have over here. It's pretty hard to tell. But I mean, if you look at where it says that camera's pointed, it looks like it's going directly east. So if that little camera angle is correct, then it seems like we'd actually be looking at this little portion of the fire, which, I mean, that's definitely a concern because we have 36 right there, and that would be trying to cross 36. But I think I would still rather have it be over there than if that camera was pointed at some different spot fire that we hadn't noticed earlier right about here, because then the southwesterly winds would try to push that directly into Manton. So Manton is going to be up here. Let's clean this up a little bit. Turn off fire history for a moment. Actually, fire history is important in this aspect because, you know, I believe this camera, so this one that we're looking at, which seems to be one of the most active parts of the fire that we can find across the fire. We're seeing even some of that pyrocumulus. Seems like that's actually this camera looking all the way across the northern edge at this hot spot here, which is just south of 36. I think I remember actually Watch Duty saying something about it crossing 36. Let's update Watch Duty again. I want to make sure we have the most recent information at all times. So acreage up to 373,000. And there is an update from a few seconds ago. So Butte County evacuations update. Some actually reduced from evacuation orders to warnings. So those are going to be areas where there's good news. It looks like that's, in Forest Ranch. That's great news. Because they wanted to do that yesterday, and then there was, I think, maybe a couple flare-ups around Forest Ranch. So then they had to keep the evacuation orders in place. But it looks like now we've seen things lifted. Although, right there, I should always say, by the time some people are watching this video, if you're not watching it live, these evacuation warnings and orders may have changed. So always go with the local updated information, not what you're hearing me talk about with evacuation orders in these videos. 17 minutes ago, said spot fire previously noted across Lanes Valley Road is approximately 200 acres in grass per air attack. I believe that's going to be co-located camera. That's going to be that spot that they're talking about, and it actually looks like their air attack's been working there. Doesn't look like it's kicking up nearly as much heat as it used to be. But then this northeastern portion of the fire does look to be getting pretty close to 36. And I want to go perimeter only for a second, because you can actually see there are some structures in here. Is that Sky Ranch? I don't know why that name is popping out to me. So I'm not seeing that labeled. If anyone knows what that is called in there, let me know in the live chat. But looks like Vanguard Avenue, Ponderosa Way, and then you have 36 right there. So that was a little pocket that they had tied it into 36. And then we have these structures within there. If we look at Modus and Veers, it actually looks like more of the heat's on the more eastern side. Let's look at current detections. Again, this is going to overestimate. Yeah, it looks like there's still actually not as much heat coming off directly where those structures are. It's more to the east of those structures. And the southwesterly winds would threaten to push this heat over 36, but it's at least not an easterly wind that's pushing that a lot of that heat directly into where we see the largest amount of structures there. So, zooming back out, it's at least good to see not many structures towards the northeast of where we have the largest amount of heat coming off of the fire right now. With that being said, I know they're hoping to hold it at 36, so I'm trying to find recent information to find out if it has been able to spot over 36 here. But, I mean, most recent information we can find, it doesn't seem... Oh, let's see. Additionally, the fire is also close to impacting 36 near Dale's Station area, and additional ground resources have been requested to that area as well. So let's see if we can look at Dale's Station. Dale's Station. Let's see if I just search that. I don't think that's... that actually might be accurate. Because there's 36. It's showing Dale's. That's going to be on the kind of left side, it looks like, of Inskip Hill. Oh, so that's maybe this little hot spot down over here. Maybe that's Dale's Station area with that little cluster of structures right there. Then you're going to have 36 coming along. So I think that's what that one's talking about, is that northern side. And then we also have the spot fire up here, which actually looks to be improving. And then we have this northeastern shoulder of the fire, which I'll show the satellite imagery because I think that kind of best illustrates what's happening on the fire just overall. There's that maybe Dale's Station one. Hopefully I'm correct on the location on that. There's the spot fire. That was the reason I actually started this live stream, because it looked like activity was picking up back in the northern part of the fire, and the southwesterly winds were going to threaten Manton. I don't want to say they're in the clear yet. It just does look like things are moving in the right direction. They just blasted it with air attack. You see how much smoke was coming off of it 3 hours ago? Based on the fuels, based on the heat, based on the humidity, we did see a station in this area that had 20 mile per hour winds. You would think that it would be rushing towards Manton and Shingletown, but it actually looks like the smoke on that spot fire is actually starting to kind of cool off a bit. So I see that someone just said in the chat, would you be able to tell me how close the fire is to Shingletown? That's actually a good update for us to do right now. So let's clean it up. Oh, we don't want to turn off fire activity. So this morning we were looking, I'll go Modus and Veers. This morning we were looking great on this northern part of the fire. They took advantage of some of the cooler, more moist conditions we had over the weekend. They went direct on the northern part, and those yellow stars are going to be heat from more than 24 hours ago. The red stars are going to be within the last 12 hours. And on this northern side, so zooming out here, this northern side, we have Manton right there, Shingletown up north of Manton, and it was showing very little heat, but then you see these two little red stars still around Inskip Hill. Well, what happened this afternoon is as things got hotter and drier, what previously looked, I don't want to say out, but where it previously looked like there was very little heat coming off of the northern half of the fire, all it really takes is one little burning ember to drop into some dry fuels, and then all of a sudden it turns into a spot fire like that. And then this was kicking off a lot of smoke with the southwesterly winds threatening to push this part of the fire closer towards Manton, which is that cluster of structures, and Shingletown, which is that cluster of structures. But if we look at the most recent part of this camera angle, it actually looks like that spot fire is starting to calm down a bit. So that's good news right there. We can actually look at it from the Shingletown view. Let's look at the last maybe 6 hours. Wow, they're socked in with smoke earlier. It tells you that the winds are coming from the southwest. Let's just zoom through here. So now let's actually change this to the last 3 hours because you couldn't really see anything 3 to 6 hours ago. So right there, that's where that spot fire pops up. So just so we get our bearings here. Manton, Shingletown, our camera is going to be right up there looking down at Inskip Hill. And then our spot fire is going to be just across Lanes Valley Road. I guess it doesn't pop up on this map, but that's Lanes Valley Road right there. The spot fires actually crossed that. It said it was in grass mostly, so maybe it dropped down into where you see less of the green and more of the grass right here. And then you're going to notice a lot more smoke kicking up, but then they just get a bunch of air attack on it. Manton's going to be over here because we're now looking down at the spot fire. And then the fact that the smoke was coming straight towards Shingletown at first was, I would say, a big concern because that means the winds are blowing directly at you. And that means that the fire is moving directly towards you. But now it looks like there's a lot less smoke coming off right there. And I'm actually really glad that we just looked at this camera angle because we were a bit worried earlier about the fact that there's 2 cameras on Inskip Hill, and this second camera actually looked more active than that first spot fire. This is Inskip Hill number 2, where it's a spinner at first, but then you actually start to see some of this pyrocumulus showing up. And what I was worried about is if that camera was maybe looking at maybe like the east side of Inskip Hill right here, like the top one is looking more north, And then if this one was looking more like right around there. So I was afraid that it wasn't all good news on the northern part of the fire, that this spot fire seems to be calming down. I was afraid that maybe there's another spot like right here, and that's what we're seeing in this camera angle with these pyrocumulus clouds popping up. But now that we're able to kind of tie it in, you look at the direction, it does look like it's actually looking all the way across the northern perimeter of this fire, more towards this heat on the northeastern section. And that view from Shingletown actually is reassuring in that regard, because what you're going to see is that one spot fire pick up and then decrease in smoke activity. So that is definitely, that spot fire right there is definitely this one that we're looking at. I believe that's the one that crossed Lanes Valley Road. But the key thing that I want to point out is that there is not another spot fire like just out of that camera angle over here. So that's what we were worried about earlier. So it makes us believe that this view, which is, again, makes us believe that it is actually this eastern side of the fire that we're looking at. So I would say that's good news for Manton and Shingletown, because with those southwesterly winds, that was the main concern. And I just remembered that what sent me on this tangent was somebody asking me to measure the distance. So maybe I'll do that before anything else. So let's go from Lanes Valley Road, because that's where I'd imagine that spot fire is right about there. To Manton, that was about 4 miles. And then to Shingletown, I believe it's maybe right around there, about 8 miles. So honestly, we're looking way better, I would say, in Manton and Shingletown than we were at the beginning of this video, because when I started this video, let's actually push this back to 6 hours now. When I started the video, it was just these little spots that were crossing Lanes Valley Road, and they were really picking up in steam. And I just thought, oh, this might just continue, and it's going to take off like we saw happen on the fire in previous days. And right here is about where I started the live stream, I believe, when it was just kicking up, that smoke going directly towards Manton and Shingletown, meaning the fire would be trying to move directly towards them. But then in the last hour, or not the last hour, the last 30 minutes, look how much less smoke is coming off of that at the moment. And I'd imagine they're still hitting it with air attack. So, looking at those planes, helicopters, yeah, it looks like they're still circling right around Lanes Valley Road, just continuing to drop on that part of the fire. So, looking a lot better in Manton and Shingletown. This eastern side of the fire is definitely a concern, though. So, this eastern section of the fire, we do have some structures in here. I'll go perimeter only so we can see the structures a bit easier. They tied in the fire perimeter to 36, which is that road that you see right there. Created this little unburned pocket around all of those structures. Again, if anybody knows what that little pocket is, let me know in the chat, because it doesn't seem to be labeled anywhere. I want to say I remember somebody calling it Sky Ranch, but I'm not confident about that. But that right there goes along with this map showing that cluster of structures. And then where we're seeing a lot of heat right now, it is now has now shifted into my new main concern on this fire, is this northeastern section right there. The main reason that might be my new main concern is because we really want to hold this fire on 36. You can see that they did it successfully in the past, how the fire perimeter comes right up to 36, and then maybe even slops over it at some points. But at least on this northeastern section of the fire, it seems like they had held it there. But then when we look at all satellites, now it's starting to show some heat across 36. Now, if it had crossed, I think they would have an update on Watch Duty saying that it had crossed. So last update 15 minutes ago. That's just about the evacuation warnings. And I'm not going to go over those in this video because by the time some people are watching this video, those may have changed. Let's see if the air attack tells us anything. So it's circling around right there. It's hard to tell where it's been dropping. If it's been dropping up here, then that would be a little concerning. That would maybe make us think that there was a spot fire over 36 and then they're trying to put it out. But I think if it had crossed 36 right here, I think we would have heard that. I think they would have updated that on watch duty. Now, with all that being said, we can now actually look at that side of the fire. That's definitely one of the areas of the fire where we're seeing the most activity, where there's actually some of that pyrocumulus popping up right there, and even more so recently. So let's update this camera again. Because unlike the spot fire around Inskip Hill, which seems to be reducing in activity, this side now seems to be picking up. And looking at this, kind of think about these three different plumes right there. It might be like the area closest towards 36, which I will say the good news there is that that's showing the yellow, which would be your maybe less intense heat coming off of the fire. And then you have more heat down towards the south. So that might be these other plumes right here. So maybe 36 is up here. The fire is still maybe holding on the southern side of 36, but then we have all of this heat shown from this camera looking over here. The plumes we're looking at might be that one, and that one on this camera. So now let's look at the last 3 hours. And it's just sort of chugging along earlier. Notice the blue skies today, less smoke cover, which has allowed our temperatures to increase more than it did on Saturday, which has made things drier. We've also seen some winds around 15 to 20 miles per hour, which isn't as windy as we were on Friday, but it's certainly windier than we were on Saturday. And yeah, activity has picked up in the last 15 to 20 minutes there. Starting to show pyrocumulus again on this northeastern section of the fire. Now, let's actually look at it from space. This one updates automatically, so this is going to be a current view. Yeah, you can see how much smoke is coming off of the northeastern section. And if you look really closely, you can actually see those pyrocumulus that we were viewing from the other camera angle. You notice that little white pop right there. So wait for the end of the loop. You're going to see those two distinct plumes pop up right there. Tying that in, that's the first one, that's that second plume. And then tying it in here, that's going to be maybe right around there, right around there. And that camera angle is looking directly across the northern half of the fire. So the concern there is that when we turn on the winds, it's coming from the south-southwest. So that's going to try to take all that heat. And right now, I'm still holding confident that they've held it to the south of 36. But with the winds and with all of that smoke being kicked up right there, imagine how many burning embers are in this smoke plume. All it really takes is one of those burning embers to fall over here and then drop into the fuels. And what happens with burning embers is your lighter embers are going to be able to go farther, which makes sense because they're lighter. But the smaller ones are also more likely to stop burning by the time they touch the ground. So it's actually your heavier embers that are going to get picked up. They aren't going to travel as far, but there's a better chance that they're still going to be burning when they hit the ground. And then what happens is you have all of this dry, abundant fuel that hasn't burnt out in decades, and all it really takes is one of those burning embers to get picked up in the plume, drop down across 36, and then all of a sudden we have a spot fire, and it starts taking off towards the north. With that being said, I haven't seen any reports that it actually has crossed 36 on this section right there. I also haven't heard any reports that it's crossed 32. And that's the other part of the fire that we're watching very closely, because if you look at the satellite imagery, look at that eastern side of the fire. There's, oh, interesting, the winds seem to be shifting. That's why it's always useful looking at the satellite imagery, because when this loop restarts, watch how it's from the south earlier, or more southwest, and then it actually looks like it's starting to shift westerly right now. See how the winds start to tilt that direction? So let's see if we can see that on this map right here. This is going to be roughly, there's Chico, there's Red Bluff, so this is going to be roughly where our fire is. Yeah, you see on the western side of the fire, a lot of those arrows are still showing southwesterly winds. I believe that's the one by Inskip Hill. Maybe. Where's Manton? There's Shingletown. There's Manton. And a lot of the winds here look like they're still coming from the southwest. Some gusts around 10 to 20 miles per hour. Notice our temperatures. We got up to about 89, max wind gust 20, min relative humidity 22%. So it still looks like it's southwesterly on the northern part of the fire. But then you look over here. I mean, it's not all the way over to Lake Almanor, we know that. But you look at the wind direction, and now it looks like it's shifted from the west. So it'd be trying to push the fire to the east. And then that goes along with what we're seeing here, where on the north, you look closely and that smoke is still going to the north because we have south winds. But then on the eastern section of the fire, it looks like those winds have shifted a lot more westerly. So let's see if that's actually in the weather forecast here. And actually, yeah, the weather forecast was pretty spot on for this. So you notice we're kind of estimating where the fire perimeter would be. But zooming in here, I believe I clicked right on Manton. That's our dot right there. So the western side of the fire is going to be right about there. Look at that wind direction. It's from the south. It's showing around 20 to 25 mile per hour gusts. But then you look over here to the eastern part of the fire, and it is showing a lot more southwesterly and then a lot more west in that wind. So the forecast models did pretty well. Let's see if the winds are going to be decreasing. Yeah, we finally see the winds decrease overnight. I guess we did over the weekend as well, but one of the problems on Thursday and Friday is the winds were staying. Actually, most of last week, this was the problem, is the winds were staying around 20 miles per hour overnight. But it does look like the winds are going to be coming down significantly during the overnight hours. Now, with that being said, the fact that it shows how westerly those winds are now. Let's see if that's a concern to some structures. So let's go perimeters only. We've got that cluster of structures there, which would be threatened by a more westerly wind because we have heat off of this section of the fire. Actually, let's see if, can we figure out what those structures are? Is that mineral? Yeah, that be mineral right there. Let's measure how far that is. It's going to be... Oh, that's actually farther away than I thought it was going to be. 6.82 miles. And then from kind of right there, let's clear that away. We're seeing a lot of heat coming off of the fire right there. That's going to be about 9 miles. But, so that's good news that it's still that much distance between, again, I believe that's mineral, that cluster of structures that we're seeing right there. If I'm wrong, let me know in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on it. And just to be sure. Yeah, that's showing about 9 miles too. So kind of double checked our measurement right there. Then if we turn on where a lot of this heat is on the fire, that's the part of the fire where we've seen a lot of heat. So maybe not. No, I'd say I'm now concerned about mineral. It does look like it's a good maybe shift in winds for this cluster of structures around 36 right there, which has the unburned pocket. Again, we oh yeah, so I think somebody just said, Eric Miller, thank you. He says, yes, Sky Ranch is the airstrip near that neighborhood on 36 in that little pocket northeast corner of the perimeter. That was perfect timing, Eric. I was literally just wondering again. So that looks like Sky Ranch right there. The shift in wind direction to a more westerly flow is actually going to be good news for Sky Ranch because we have all of this heat right here, and that would try to push the fire away from Sky Ranch. Where it would be bad news is for Mineral right here, because although we do still have what we measured 9 miles from the fire perimeter, I'm almost hesitant to do what I'm about to do, but I'm going to do it. Because usually these red boxes over exaggerate where the fire is because it picks up on some of the heat in the smoke plume. So that actually, where I'm doing this measurement from, may actually just be some heat from the smoke plume, but it might also be where the fire has been able to advance to. So doing that to Mineral, that's going to show about 5.5 miles. So it's perhaps moved about what? 4 miles, 3.5. But again, really hard to tell. We're only as good as the most recent information that we can find, and unfortunately, the most current heat detections are also the most inaccurate detections. So I would say if you're tuning in because you heard about the spot fire on the northern section of the fire around Inskip Hill, I've actually shifted away from that being my main concern. I would maybe now say that Mineral would be my top concern, because if we look at fire history, there is no fire history between where we have the largest amount of heat on this fire and Mineral, and the wind direction is pushing directly from the fire towards Mineral. It is straight southwesterly right there. Let's see. Yeah, and you can see those 2 pyrocumulus plumes pop up on this imagery right there. So it's actually picking up an activity in the last maybe 30 minutes to the last hour. If we want to view that again, let's look at the last 3 hours. I'll just let this camera play out. Well, I should actually say what camera we're looking at before I show it, because it's not really helpful just to show a camera. So that's going to be this camera from Inskip Hill looking across the northern edge of the fire. And I believe what we're looking at is smoke plume right there, smoke plume right there, maybe smoke plume right there, matching up with smoke plume right there, smoke plume right there, smoke plume right there. So now I'll press play on that and take a sip of water. So you see how in the last 20 to 30 minutes, you start to see a lot more activity. Where at first, it's certainly chugging along, but now you're starting to see some of those white caps. I believe they call it capping out when that happens. That means you have pyrocumulus showing up, especially in actually the last maybe 30 minutes. Starting to see a lot more of that. So fire activity actually seems to be picking up on this northeastern section of the fire right here. And again, the reason that's a concern is because we have Mineral right there and southwesterly winds that are going to be trying to push the fire directly towards that area. So that's one area that we're looking at. The reason I started this live stream was actually because of the spot fire on the northern edge of the fire, where, again, no fire history between Inskip Hill, where that spot fire started, and Manton and Shingletown. And then we also have more southerly winds on the western side of the fire. Eastern side of the fire has more southwesterly, even westerly at this point. But this spot fire right there matches up. Let's look at the whole 6 hours. It's basically what happened. Let's clean this up. No fire history. Perimeters only. So there's the perimeter. Here's Manton. Here's Shingletown. Here's Inskip Hill. This morning, we had very little heat on the northern side of the fire. They had taken advantage of the cooler, more moist conditions this weekend. And really, we're feeling pretty confident about this northern side at the beginning of the day. But then you see 2 of those little red stars in there. All it takes is for some of that heat, or some of those little hot spots, maybe even burning like what would appear underneath the ground or maybe inside of a trunk. And then it gets hotter and drier as you get into the afternoon. It starts to flare back up again. And then it kicked some spot fires across. Want to make sure I get that street name right. I believe it's Laney Valley Road. So this is the update that started our live stream. Lanes Valley Road, yeah. Radio traffic indicates there is now multiple spots across Lanes Valley Road, with largest approximately 30 acres. And then they updated to say the spot fire previously noted across Lanes Valley Road is approximately 200 acres in grass. So what that's talking about is right here, the heat detections aren't actually showing up on this map because it's so current. But look at all the air attack that's been hitting this spot fire right here. So zooming out, tying it all together. This morning, still very little heat. And then if we look at the current heat satellite, you see those boxes right there? Notice it's now yellow and orange, whereas when we started this live stream, it was red. And that's when the spot fire was growing from 30 acres to 200 acres. And it was looking pretty ominous because our winds were in a direction that it was going to push this spot fire directly towards Manton, directly towards Shingletown. But if we look at the loop of this spot fire, so you're going to see it start. There's actually a number of spot fires that start. See how quickly it picks up in activity? A lot of smoke coming off of it. You also see some of those retardant drops though. Another little spot starting down there. And then at that point, that's about where we started the live stream, where it's looking pretty ominous. You have Manton, Shingletown off in the distance here. This spot fire would be moving through a lot of fuels that haven't burnt out in decades. Similar conditions to previous days where it's hot, dry with some wind gusts. We measured in this area around 15 to 20 miles per hour. It was looking like this was just going to take off and go towards Manton and Shingletown. But then, watch what happens. All that smoke, you'll see continued air attack there. You saw that next retardant drop. And then watch what happens to the smoke. It starts to die down. And I'll be seeing this live with you for the first time too. In the last 10 minutes, that looks amazing. I can't believe that they were able to kind of catch that spot. I don't want to say we're in the clear at this point, but I mean, the peak of the afternoon in terms of heat, dry air, and wind is behind us. So if they were able to take that and turn it into that during the hottest, driest, windiest part of the afternoon, then it seems like we're in a pretty good position right now. So actually not as worried about Manton and Shingletown as I was at the beginning of this video, and even the heat detections tell that story. At the beginning of this video, we were showing red boxes right there, which shows very intense heat. Now it's showing yellow to orange, so not as much heat coming off of that part of the fire. Now, where we do have more concerns is and then I should just mention, we had another spot fire right there, which I believe is Dale's Station. Hopefully I'm remembering that correct. I believe Dale's Station is that little cluster of structures in there. We heard about that spot fire, but that's also an area where they've been putting in a lot of air attack. And you notice the western side of this fire still has very southerly winds. So that's good news for all of these structures to the west, as that's going to be trying to push the fire just straight to the north and actually not towards a lot of those structures. And we look over here, it does still look like they have a lot of air attack on that western side of the fire, so it seems like that's maybe still active and something to keep our eye on. But the most active part of this fire is clearly the northeastern section. Best way to see that again. Satellite imagery. There's that western spot. Here's the Inskip Hill spot. That was close towards Manton and Shingletown. And then there's the northeastern side of the fire. Just very active over there, with even some pyrocumulus starting to pop up in the last maybe 30 minutes to the last hour. So let's now direct our gaze back over here. Again, if you're in Chico, Paradise, Magalia, Forest Ranch, Cohasset, this wind direction is great for you guys because it's basically pushing the fire away from you. One thing that we're seeing, though, on the satellite imagery is that the wind direction seems to be shifting right now, where it's going a lot more northerly earlier. Now it looks like it's going almost straight to the east, which means our winds have shifted from the southwest to a more westerly direction. So westerly winds push the fire to the east. So what is that going to do to the fire? Well, it's going to take a lot of this heat and try to push it through these fuels that, let's turn on fire history, haven't burnt out in decades. Now, Sky Ranch is actually going to like that westerly wind because that's going to take this heat and push it to the east instead of pushing it closer to where you see those structures in there. And then it also actually might be good if you're thinking about the fact that we don't want it to cross 36 right here. A southerly wind would be more threatening to 36 because it would take burning embers, drop it over 36 here. So the fact that the winds look to be shifting, watch that wind shift, more to the west would actually be good news in terms of holding it at 36. Bad news for fire growth in this entire pocket, because you look at that, there's no fire history in there. That's where the largest amount of heat is. That's where most of the smoke is coming off of the fire right now. And we do have some structures. Looks like that's mineral right there. I would say mineral has shifted to my new top concern on this fire. I mean, we measured this not too long ago, and we still have about maybe 6 miles right there. We measured another one that showed maybe around 4 miles. So we still have some distance, but as we've seen on this fire in the past, it's able to cover a lot of distance in a very short period of time. Now the good news is that unlike last week, where our winds were staying around 15 to 20 miles per hour, if we look at tonight, the winds are actually going to be dropping way down. So, and it looks like the wind direction shifts a little bit as well. It looks like overnight goes a bit more from the east, so that would actually try to push the fire away from mineral. Or, once the winds calm down that much, winds aren't going to be a big factor anymore. So right now I'd say what we're going to be trying to follow is how close towards mineral some of this heat is able to get. Looks like it's moved about 3 miles if we were to trust these heat detections. Again, where you see those boxes is very inaccurate, so I don't know if I can actually say the fire has moved 3 miles towards the northeast, but I mean that's the best information that we have to go off of. And it looks like Justin just said new evac orders in the northern area, so I'd say it makes sense that we have new evac orders in the northern area. Let's clean this map up, just based on how much heat we're seeing coming off of the fire, how much smoke we're seeing coming off of the fire, and the fact that we do have those southwesterly winds that would try to take some of that heat and push it up towards the north. Now, one area that I haven't talked about in probably 30 minutes, but is also I would say one of the big question marks is they did this firing operation over the weekend. They took advantage of some of the cool, moist conditions, and they basically tied it in to, let's clear our ruler away. We don't need that anymore. They tied it into 32. You're able to see it a bit better on this map. So 32 comes along here. This is the eastern side of the fire. And they put some fire on the ground, then it backs down this hill. And then the hope there is that where you have more active fire perimeter, it would bump into where those fuels have been cleared out, and then it would stop before 32. And then what we were looking at this morning was, it doesn't tie all the way down to the fire, so hopefully it doesn't just sneak through that little opening right there, across 32, and then you have Butte Meadows right there. So looking at it on this map, firing operation along 32, there's that little opening, there's Butte Meadows. Let's look at what the heat looked like this morning. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell, but try to look at the red stars. That's going to be where you had more recent heat. So we did still have some recent heat on that area right here that's close to the opening. But then, and then you can discount some of the heat that you see on the firing operation, because that's actually going to be good heat. That's going to be where they put fire on the ground purposely to clear out some of the fuel. But our main concern was that opening right there, and then Butte Meadows right there, which you see with that cluster of structures. What is concerning is the forecast, at least from this website, shows a very southerly wind. So that would try to take all of this heat and push it towards the north. But when we look at the satellite imagery, it looks like that forecast is no longer holding up, because the smoke looks to be going directly to the east now. So it seems like the winds have shifted direction. And if we actually look at some of the stations on the ground, there's Chico, there's Red Bluff. So western side of the fire, it still looks like we have southerly, southwesterly winds. And that goes along with what we can tell from those smoke plumes right there. You notice that smoke going towards the north. So that's going to say the winds on this western side of the fire are from the south. So it goes along with, these are actual weather stations on the ground that we're looking at. Now that weather station shows still a southerly wind. But then if you look at some of these stations as you get closer towards like Lake Almanor, I'm not saying the fire's close to Lake Almanor or anything like that, but notice the wind direction. It's coming from the west. So what those arrows are doing, you could think of these as pointing the direction of the wind. So on the western side of the fire, it's southerly and southwesterly. But then over here, it looks like our winds have shifted westerly. And that is not what this forecast model was predicting. I will say it seems to be what the windy model was predicting. And that's why I usually trust windy a bit more. When it comes to winds, it shows very southerly winds over here, and then you can see a bit more of that westerly component over here. And then just looking at the conditions, one maybe good thing I would say about the winds is that we're not seeing 30-mile-per-hour gusts. I'm always the optimist trying to draw out the silver lining. It's not as windy as we were on Friday. So the fire is not going to move as quickly as it did on Friday. With that being said, there's a lot of heat coming off of this fire right now. And when your fuels are as dry as they are right now, you don't need as strong of winds to have quick fire spread. So it's been a while since actually before we look at the live cameras, I want to see if they still have air attack trying to connect this firing operation right there to protect it from Butte Meadows, because that was something that we did see on watch duty earlier. We scroll over here. So there's the firing operation, Butte Meadows. And then there's that opening that we were talking about. See how there's I don't like those stars. See how there's this opening right here? We did have some heat there this morning, so I was worried that it would be able to jump 32 right here. That whole firing operation is along 32. if we look at watch duty, this is going to be a good indication of what's happening on this area of the fire. So those helicopters, that one still seems to be dropping, connecting the firing operation with the perimeter itself. And Butte Meadows is right there. So, and then that one, you can see those paths the helicopters are flying. And then that's going to be 32 right there. So it seems like this helicopter, maybe it's flying up right here, and then it's dropping something right along 32. It looks like just like what this helicopter did. So the fact that they're still dropping right there makes me believe that it hasn't crossed 32, which is good news, because with the winds shifting much more westerly, so pushing the fire to the east, that would now be a big concern, is that it would be able to kind of skirt through that opening right there and then threaten Butte Meadows. But the fact that the helicopters are still dropping on the west side of 32 based on that information, it makes it look like the fire has not crossed 32 just yet. And maybe I'll update watch duty to see if there's been any recent update there. It looks like the last update 12 minutes ago. Yeah, Eric made a good point. None of the forecasts are all that good at accounting for the topography anyways. Yeah, that's a good point. That's something that I often see. I'm a meteorologist on the Central Coast, and the reason that I still have a job and people can't just get their weather forecast from iPhone apps is because all the different microclimates on the Central Coast, it can be a 20-degree difference in a matter of miles with different wind directions based on canyons. So there's lots of different microclimates that the models just aren't at a higher resolution yet to be able to pick up on. That's something that will change in future years, and that's why I'm maybe focusing on wildfire to have some job security there. But also focusing on wildfire because, again, I'm a California resident. I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains, basically between the CZU lightning complex and the SCU lightning complex. There's ash raining on the place I was staying up in the woods, and I was at the top of a box canyon with one way in and out. And I remember I was trying to find good information about like what was happening on the CZU lightning complex, on the SCU, to know, like, should I get out of here? Is the fire coming closer towards me? And couldn't really find any information that actually told me where the fire was hot and where it was going. So then I just found lots of links, and then I figured out the answer to my own question. Then I figured, you know what, there's probably people who have the same questions that I do. So then I just started making these wildfire forecast videos, and 5 years later, we're still doing it, and hopefully getting better at it. So just coming back here, I want to see what their update was 14 minutes ago. It might still, yeah, it's still just about evacuation warnings and orders. Again, I don't go over those in these videos because I know some people watch these videos at a later time, and by the time they're watching it, they might change. So I don't want to give any wrong information there. Now I want to see what this eastern side of the fire actually looks like. So, show on the map. This is going to be Colby Mountain, and I believe this is going to be looking at the eastern side of the fire. Whoop. Oh, what happened here? Actually, this is a better view of the eastern side of the fire. This is... what's going on with our cameras here? Okay. Co-located cameras. I'm not sure why it's doing this. Let's go Colby Mountain too. Huh. It's not really letting us click at the time lapses. Weird. I don't know what's going on with the cameras right now. Let's see if watch duty's any better. So, Colby Mountain, that's one view. That's the other view. Maybe let's try to look at number 2. And let's look at the last 3 hours. So this is going to be looking, oh, it's spinning at first. That's not exactly helpful. Alright, so that camera is not really working well for us. What about this one? Nope. What about this one? Nope. I think our best bet is still this one. Seems like all of the cameras are freaking out right now. I don't know what's going on here. Let's see. Okay. So we can at least check up on that hotspot on the northern side of the fire. This is the view we're looking at right here. Is actually the reason I started the live stream, because this northern side of the fire, which wasn't seeing much heat in the first half of the day near Manton and Shingletown, was showing spot fires around, what was it, Laney, I always forget what it's called, Laney Road? Let's see, Laney Park Road? Coming down here, Lanes Valley Road. I need to remember that. So it went from 30 acres to 200 acres on this northern side right here. The reason that was a concern is we had southwesterly winds, or have southwesterly winds in that part of the fire, pushing it towards Manton and Shingletown. The reason I say was a concern is because when we started the video it looked like that, but then look what happens here in the last 15 to 30 minutes. You're going to see this activity significantly decrease, and they just blasted it with air attack. So that smoke is going directly towards Shingletown, but that looks like a lot better than what it looked like when we first started this. So let's see if we can get some of these other cameras to work. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's going on with the other cameras, but luckily we have other information that we can go off of. So kind of coming back out here, that northern side, that hotspot that we were just looking at, not as big of a concern now because it seems like that one's cooling off. Then we have Sky Ranch in here, and this whole northeastern section of the fire is where we do still have the largest amount of heat. So zooming out here, see all that red? That's where the fire is currently active. And what we're hoping is that it hasn't crossed 32. I believe if it had crossed 32 in this area near Butte Meadows, I think we would have heard about it on the Watch Duty app. And it looks like those helicopters, now it's showing that helicopter dropping on the east side of 32. So hopefully that doesn't mean we got a spot that came over and now they're dropping on the east side. What did that one do? This helicopter seemed to drop on the east side of 32 as well. So hopefully that doesn't mean that it was able to hop over right here and then it would be threatening Butte Meadows. The reason I say that is because what were southerly southwesterly winds pushing the smoke towards the north and northeast, look at the way the smoke drifts around. It now looks like it's going almost directly to the east, so with a more westerly wind. So coming in here, ooh, that might be something to watch, because that's where we have the opening between where they did that great firing operation. They took advantage when the conditions were cooler and more moist. But then we still had some heat right here. You imagine 32 connects like right about there. So the reason a westerly wind would be bad is because that would take some of those hot spots and try to push it like that towards Butte Meadows. But then we do have 32 coming in right there. And then we've seen the helicopters on that part of the fire. In the past, though, the helicopters were dropping on the western side of 32. You see that 32 symbol right there? Now, it looks like they're dropping on the eastern side. So that's not a guarantee that means there was a hot spot that went over 32. It could just mean they're maybe preparing that side and kind of getting it ready. But I would rather see them still dropping on the western side. And then there's Butte Meadows right there. So we don't like to see that the winds have shifted more from the west, which would try to push it towards Butte Meadows. That actually might be my new top concern on the fire. The other one is mineral. So looking at mineral, that's going to be up here. I would say Butte Meadows is more of a concern to me than mineral right now, though, just because mineral still has some distance. The concern for mineral, though, is that the winds are trying to push the hottest part of the fire directly towards them. But when we measure it, it looks like they still have about 5-6 miles between where we're seeing a lot of those heat detections and where you see some of those structures up there. Whereas you're seeing those heat detections very close to Butte Meadows on this east side. And then in this whole area, it does look like there's some structures in here, but it could actually be, beneficial for California if some of this burnt out. Because, I don't want to go that far, but, a lot of our plants and animals have evolved with wildfire, so wildfires in California are just a natural part of the ecosystem and actually help a lot of plants and animals survive and reproduce. But we don't ever want to see... We would much rather have fire burning in maybe May or June when the conditions aren't like they are right now, when we're up in the 90s, dry conditions. Fuel's about as dry as you're ever going to see them this time of the year. So I see people are talking about Chester in the live. So I want to read a couple of these. So now, Northwest sector now has 11 hotspots. Lane Valley Road, there were 4 10 minutes ago. So we've looked at Lanes Valley Road a lot. The thing I will say is the hotspot in that area actually looks to be the biggest hotspot that we saw, which I believe this is the one that was growing to 300 acres. They just blasted it with air attack, and you do see a number of different spots just even from this camera view, but you're noticing decreased activity compared to what we had an hour or two ago. And, our temperatures are going to continue to go down. Our relative humidity is now going to be going up, and our winds are now going to be going down. So we're looking a lot better on that northern side of the fire. What we're looking at is this heat detection up here around Inskip Hill. That was the main concern at the beginning of this video because we have Manton, Shingletown right there, and on the western side of the fire the winds are more southerly, so that was trying to push the fire directly towards those structures. But based on that camera angle, looks like, I don't want to say we're good, but it hasn't moved very much. And I think I've been live for about 2 hours now. Hasn't moved very much, and it's actually decreasing in smoke. So we're looking a lot better for Manton and Shingletown. Some spots over here on the west side, I believe that I was saying it was near Dale's Station, which I think is those structures there. But the winds on the west side are more southerly, so that's going to try to push the fire towards the north. And we've been watching this for 2 hours, and we haven't seen big increases in the heat coming off of this west side of the fire. Where we have seen big increases is over on the northeastern side of the fire. Just perfectly in line with the wind direction, where when the winds were more southwesterly, we're seeing kind of the fire pop up a bit, moving. Every time I'd update it seems like you're getting boxes showing up more towards the north of where they had been recently. And then now it seems like we're seeing more of the new boxes pop up to the east, because the winds are shifting more westerly. And I just saw that this updated again, so I want to look at it. Yeah, we have that big pyrocumulus coming off of this northeastern section of the fire right now. It almost looks like there's maybe 3 different plumes that we're looking at right there. It's a shame that our cameras aren't really working on that side of the fire for some reason. So show on map. Colby Mountain, Bald Mountain Butte 2. Hey, I think it's actually working again. Alright, so this is going to be a view from the east side of the fire, looking back at it. So imagine, don't know exactly where this camera is because it doesn't show up on the Watch Duty app, but we're looking at the fire from this direction. So now, let's check it out. You're going to see things really pick up in the last hour or two. Some of that pyrocumulus, whenever you see that pyrocumulus, that means there's a lot of heat being produced, because in order for those pyrocumulus to form, it has to be basically a lot of rising motion, which means you have heat close towards the surface, that air becomes less dense, starts to push up. Now, in the last, it's hard to tell because the camera kind of freaked out for a second there, and that was something that we saw. But it's hard to, it looks like it's still very active. I wanted to say, oh, it looks like we had more of a pyrocumulus about an hour or two ago, but when we update this again, we might see that thing pop up right there. And based on this imagery, it looks like the fire hasn't lost any steam. If anything, it looks like it's still picking up steam on this northeastern section of the fire where we have all of that heat right there. Again, what's weird is the wind looks to be a lot more westerly than what the forecast models were showing. So earlier, or maybe it's just the fact that we're getting later in the day. I guess I've been doing this live stream so long now, it's no longer the afternoon weather forecast. It's now more getting into the evening, and usually your wind directions do shift as we get into the evening. And I actually hadn't even looked at the wind direction this morning of what it was going to be around 7:30, because I was hoping we wouldn't have much activity around 7:30, but we clearly do. So winds shifting more from the west. You can tell that because of the different direction that the smoke is going now. Originally up towards the northeast, now it shifts around. And that's why my number one concern now is Butte Meadows. Now that's where it is huge that we had that cool down this weekend, and they were actually able to do a firing operation. The fact that they were able to do a firing operation at the end of July, with some of the heat that we've had over this last month, that heat wave at the beginning of the month, that's pretty amazing that they were able to do this. And basically what they did there was they tied in 32, or they just burnt along 32. Backs down here, so then when the fire perimeter bumps into that, instead of just being able to jump right over 32, you now have this big buffer where a lot of the fuels have been burnt out. And I haven't been able to see any updates that a burning ember has jumped over 32, created any spot fires over there. We haven't seen any updates about that. Again, I'm only as good as the information that I have to go off of. But where I think is the big question mark is this bottom section, where the firing operation doesn't completely tie in along 32 to where the previous fire perimeter was. We have that little gap, that little opening right there between the fire perimeter and Butte Meadows, which is right there. So coming back to this map, see that firing operation, fire perimeter. I'm just going to turn the winds off since they're wrong. It's not coming from the south. It looks like it's coming from the west now. Although, I just thought of something. Something that could be happening there is maybe your surface winds are still mostly from the south, but then your winds up at a higher level are more westerly. Because you can actually just see how you can have different wind directions based on which level you're talking about. Because right here, Looks like the smoke is now going to the east, which means the winds have shifted to the west. But then look at some of these clouds moving down here, the very high clouds. That would show a northwesterly wind. So up at a very high level, the winds are going from the northwest. Down here, it looks like the winds are going from the west to the east, but maybe the surface winds are still actually going a bit more southerly, southwesterly. So, that wasn't something that I've thought of before, but maybe could account for some of the differences we're seeing between the weather models and the direction that the smoke and the fire seems to be going right now. But just coming back here, firing operation along 32, but it doesn't tie in all the way to the fire perimeter. There's still that little gap. And then there's Butte Meadows right there, those structures. Now I'll turn that off. And then if we look at the heat detections, we are seeing a lot of heat on this eastern side of the fire. Again, that always over-exaggerates, though based on that, it makes it look like it's already pushed past the firing operation, and I haven't seen any updates that would confirm that. Isaac just said, Colby Mountain 2 camera shows fire activity near Butte Meadows. So let's see Colby Mountain 2. The last time we tried to look at this camera, it wasn't working for us. So hopefully, for some reason it keeps popping up to this 6 screen, but we can still get some information from this. Looks like there's certainly some smoke in that area, but for whatever reason, maybe this one will work for us. Let's go the last hour. Not sure what's going on here, but it's not really telling us too much, just because it's hard to see exactly what we're looking at there. Guess that wind direction, I don't know. Pretty tricky. So coming back here, tying this in with the point I was trying to make. See that perimeter? Main question mark is if it has crossed 32 right there and is getting closer towards Butte Meadows. So looking over here, we've been trying to just guess where the fire is based on where the helicopters are continuing to do drops. That one, so 32, I'll zoom in so then the little icon shows. So that's 32. There's our firing operation. That's a lot of the active perimeter. And earlier our helicopters were dropping on the west side of 32, and we viewed that as good news. So now that it seems like they're dropping on the east side of 32, I don't know if we view that as bad news. I mean, it could just mean they're still trying to maybe prepare that side for if it does come over here, but it could also mean that we've had some spots over 32, and now those helicopters are trying to put those spots out. So difficult to say exactly what's going on there, but that's now my new main concern, because we have that opening in the firing operation. It looks like there's certainly lots of heat on that side of the fire, and the winds are now pushing more to the east, which is going to try to push the fire to the east, and then we have Butte Meadows right there. So that's definitely my new main concern. The other one, again, is mineral up here, but we do have a decent amount of distance between where a lot of this heat is and mineral. And it doesn't seem like it's crossed 36 up here. It also seems like Sky Ranch is still in this nice little pocket. I'll make it perimeters only so it's a little clearer to see. See how the fire perimeter goes up to 36? Sky Ranch in this nice little pocket right there. And then with the winds apparently shifting more from the west, that would actually try to push the fire away from Sky Ranch. But it would try to push the fire towards Mineral, which is right there. Now with Mineral, you look at fire history, there's been no fire history between the fire perimeter and Mineral. And then when we turn on active heat, a lot of heat right there, although I will say it looked like we had more of the red squares earlier. And the last thing you want to see is the red squares. That's going to be where you have a lot more of your heat. So the fact that it's now shifting more to the yellow to orange might mean that we're moving in the right direction. But, and actually we've seen that on this side too. I remember maybe about an hour ago, all of these squares were showing red. And now we're starting to see a bit more of the yellow and orange. So that would make it seem like there's less heat coming off of the northeastern side of the fire. The reason I don't really believe that, though, is when we look at the satellite imagery, it just looks like things continue to pick up in intensity. We're seeing even more of those pyrocumulus clouds. Seems like every time this satellite imagery updates, we're seeing more and more heat coming. Although, you look at the smoke plume, yeah, you watch it just punch through, maybe even into the stratosphere, and then the rest of the plume goes off to the east. So, certainly a lot of heat right here, a lot of unburnt fuels. We have mineral. Let's do another measurement. We maybe haven't done this in 30 minutes. So measuring, that's still about 5 to 6 miles. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. It's a lot closer. Let's just do it from the firing operation to Butte Meadows. That's going to be about 1.86 miles right there. And then from that little gap, that little opening where it seems like they're doing some of the helicopter drops right now, that's going to be about 2.5 miles. So that 2.5 miles isn't very much. Although, I mean, yeah, the fact that I don't like the way that the winds have shifted more from the west on this eastern part of the fire, because that would try to push the fire directly towards Butte Meadows. But I haven't updated Watch Duty in a while. Let's see if they've said that it crossed 32, because that's what we don't want to see, is that it crossed 32 right here. Interesting. So Matthew says fire has jumped 32 when looking at Colby Mountain 2. Okay, let's go try to check out Colby Mountain 2. Show on map. Here's Colby Mountain 2. Yeah, it's really, I don't know what's going on. It's a bad time for this camera to freak out on us. But it's hard to tell what's going on here. We just kind of have these little images to go off of. And then co-located camera. This is going to be Colby Mountain 1. Let's maybe see what it looks like in the last 30 minutes. Yeah, all we can really see is some smoke. Yeah, hard to tell. Alright, coming back out here. We haven't checked on that hotspot up on the northern part of the fire in a while. So I should probably see if those conditions have changed at all. Because again, that's the reason we actually started this live stream, was when we saw things starting to pick up there. But just based on that, those used to be red boxes, now they're yellow boxes. So here's Manton, here's Shingletown. So that looks like we're moving in the right direction. And if we actually look at those cameras, I believe it's in Skip Hill 1. We'll do 6 hours. See some of those spot fires start. Apparently we had more than 10 spot fires start around Inskip Hill here, and we had the southwesterly winds that were going to try to push these directly towards Manton and Shingletown. But this is where some of our good news comes on the fire. Even though it was 90 degrees, relative humidity around 20%, with some wind gusts around 15 to 20 miles per hour, they amazingly were able to really calm down that big spot fire that did grow from around 30 acres to 200 acres in almost no time at all. But every time we update this camera, it looks like things are just getting better and better right there. So I'm feeling a lot better about that northern side of the fire. We haven't seen things change too much on this western side of the fire near, I believe that's called Dale's Station. And also the winds are still more southerly on the western part of the fire. You can see those smoke plumes going still more towards the north, whereas the ones on the eastern side of the fire are going more towards the east. So it's almost different wind directions depending on where you are on the fire. This eastern side is clearly where we do still have... Oh, interesting. So somebody said that camera is working on watch duty. Okay, so let's check that out. I have no attention span. I'm easily distracted here, so... But distractions are good when you're trying to figure out new information. So 30 minutes. That's going to be... Okay, so that's when it's spinning around. Then let's see if it stops spinning. Nope, that one's still spinning. Not sure why that one's freaking out so much. And 30 minutes. And this one, I think that's the camera we were looking at earlier, where all we could really see is smoke right there. So it's a bummer that that one camera is spinning, because that's literally the number one camera that we want to be able to see, because that could be looking down at 32 to see what's going on there. Let's just update watch duty again to see if we have any recent information to go off of. Also, just taking a wide view of air attack, they still have a lot of air attack on that northwestern one, and then still some air attack on that northern side of the fire right there. And then we've seen the helicopters over here. Looks like they may be refilling at the moment. And then, looks like he said, try the 3-hour interval. Up 2 hours, 3 hours. Yeah, I don't really like that camera angle. Let's see, 3 hours over here. Yeah, so this is one of the ones we were looking at the beginning of the live stream. From this angle, though, I'm not able to tell where 32 is, which is what makes it tricky. I think the best thing that I have to go off of So, let's look at the hot spots right now. There's Butte Meadows. Here's the firing operation. Here's that opening, that gap. And then it doesn't show the road right there, but if we zoom in, there's 32. And then looking at the satellite imagery, the winds seem to be shifting. Originally it's blowing the smoke more north, and then now it's blowing the smoke more east, which means the fire is most likely being pushed to the east. And then if we look at where they have some helicopters flying, interesting, it's maybe too smoky in this area now for the helicopters. So we saw them doing drops there for about an hour or two, but it's perhaps gotten too smoky in this area for the helicopters now, or perhaps they're just refilling. Hopefully that's the case, because you can see that helicopter, both of those were the ones that were dropping up here. And the last that we saw, they were starting to drop on the eastern side of 32, which isn't exactly what we want to see. We liked it when they were dropping on the western side of 32. But just because they are dropping on the eastern side doesn't mean that it has crossed there. And then there's Butte Meadows. So Butte Meadows is the main concern. Number 2, I'd say, is Mineral up here. but mineral not as much, just because we have more distance between mineral and where we have some of those heat detections, although a lot of that fuel hasn't burnt out in a very long time. I'd be surprised if, one great part of the weather forecast is that the winds are not going to be like they were last week, where it stayed very windy overnight. It looks like the winds are going to calm down significantly overnight tonight. So once we get later into the evening hours, we're going to see this fire calm down significantly. Looking at the satellite imagery right now, it looks like it's just been picking up in activity on that northeastern section of the fire over the last hour or two. Some pyrocumulus even popping up on the camera. Let's see if we can see some of that pyrocumulus. Bald Mountain 2. Let's see what it's been doing in the last 3 hours. There's that pyrocumulus popping up right there. Whenever that happens, you know that the fire is basically able to create its own weather. And then starting to see... Let's see if it starts to calm down a little bit. It starts spinning. Maybe calming down a little bit. It's weird because on the satellite imagery, it just looks like you have more of a pyrocumulus popping up right there. But then you actually look at it, and that doesn't look as intense as it did about an hour or two ago. Now, one good view that we had was from Inskip 2. But for some reason, this camera is also now just going into this weird view. So that's not actually going to tell us all that much. So, personally, I'd be surprised if this section of the fire were able to make it to mineral. I would also be surprised if it has crossed 36. It seems like they've been able to hold it at 36. And the wind direction shifting a bit more from the west to the east is actually good news in terms of it crossing 36. Bad news in terms of Butte Meadows. So, but that's where it is huge that they did that firing operation over the weekend. Because if they hadn't done that, then this fire would most likely just be ripping towards Butte Meadows right now. And because they've burnt out these fuels, it would at least slow it down and hopefully just stop it in its tracks and keep it to the west of 32. And based on the information we've been able to find, I haven't seen any confirmations that it's crossed 32 at this point yet. So Butte Meadows hopefully able to dodge another bullet today. And based on the cameras, it looks like things are starting to calm down a little bit. Things certainly calmed down on that spot fire that we were looking at on the northern edge of the fire. So that's going to be the one that was up here in Inskip Hill, that had the southwesterly winds that we were worried about it pushing towards Manton and Shingletown. But then watch how much it picks up in activity, and then you'll also be able to see all the different retardant drops that they're doing right here. And then that's going to look how much it calms down as our temperatures start to drop, our relative humidity starts to go up, but more than anything, all of the air attack that they had on here. So that's that hot spot that was threatening Manton and Shingletown. I say was just because, I think I've been doing this live stream for about 2.5 hours now, and we haven't seen those spot fires move very much, and it looks like there's much diminished smoke on that side right there. From the satellite imagery, it still looks like the northeastern side of the fire is popping off with some pyrocumulus. But when we look at some of the cameras over there, I think the best view we have of the eastern side of the fire is Bald Mountain Butte 2. It's spinning for a little while. Notice how active it was 3 hours ago. So around 4:30, that seems to be the peak of fire activity. Actually, around 5:30, Still seeing some of that pyrocumulus. But then watch the last hour. Once it stops spinning, you're going to start to see it lie down a little bit. And that's where it's really good that our weather forecast is showing that the winds are going to calm down tonight. So, right now, haven't heard any reports that it has crossed 32 and gotten closer towards Butte Meadows. Although, if they're able to hold that, that's going to be pretty amazing, because you could see how much heat we have on that eastern side of the fire right there, especially as the winds have shifted a bit more from the west to the east. We've seen more of those boxes popping up to the east. I will say, though, compared to about an hour or two ago, we're seeing less of the red boxes and more of the yellow and orange boxes, which represent less intense heat. So that goes along with the camera that we're looking at, where it's showing less intensity on the fire. And I mean, that's as you'd expect. We're around 7:45 right now. And your peak activity is usually around 3 to 5 p.m. That's going to be the hottest, driest, windiest time of the day. If we actually look at some of the wind stations or weather stations on the ground, those red numbers are going to be telling you the winds. And most of those are around 10 to 15 miles per hour. That's not bad, especially considering the 25 to 30 mile per hour gusts that we had last Thursday, Friday. So temperatures finally starting to come down, although it's still 84, 86 degrees around parts of the fire. Let's see. I'm actually interested to see. So there's Shingletown. This one's near where that spot fire was. It's still 86 degrees where that spot fire was. 13 mile per hour winds. The max gust there today was 20 miles per hour. So that is amazing that they were able to hold that spot fire when max temperature was 90 degrees, min relative humidity around 22%, and max gusts around 20 miles per hour. The fact that that didn't just take off towards Manton and Shingletown is pretty amazing. And then the fact that it looks like they've been able to hold it on 36 right here is pretty amazing. You got mineral right there, which is, I would say, probably more of a concern tomorrow, just because I don't know what kind of defense they're going to be able to put in between the fire and mineral. That's going to be a lot of tricky terrain. That's going to be a lot of fuels that haven't burnt out in decades. So I would say mineral is probably more of my concern for tomorrow. Still my concern right now, but maybe less so than 30 minutes ago, is Butte Meadows right here, and then this eastern section of the fire. Let's see if any of those helicopters have returned. Now, maybe that area of the fire might be a bit too smoky now for air attack. So, now I'd say I'm concerned about Butte Meadows at the moment. But again, they put in that firing operation, so hopefully that's holding. And we saw them doing a lot of helicopter drops, basically tying in that firing operation to the previous fire perimeter. So hopefully they're holding it at 32 right there. And the fact that we haven't seen a watch duty update saying it's crossed 32 is good news. But I also haven't checked watch duty in a little while. So let's come over here. Last updated an hour ago. So we don't really have any new information to go off of there. I will just say, always take those evacuation orders seriously, as we've seen on this fire and a lot of fires this year. Things can change rapidly. And I mean, on this fire, it was burning 4,000 to 5,000 acres per hour at one point. Went 20 miles in one day. So when you get put in an evacuation order, you should definitely just leave as quickly as you can. I think we've pretty much exhausted the resources that we have to go off of. And it looks like things are now moving in the right direction. Fire activity decreasing. Again, winds going to be decreasing overnight tonight. first thing I'm going to check in the morning is what happens on this eastern side of the fire, though. But as of the most recent information that I have to go off of, we're saying it's still holding at 32 in that firing operation. But with that being said, a lot of heat on that eastern side of the fire. And based on the smoke, looks like winds have shifted more from the west to the east. So we're just going to have to kind of see what happens there, but we haven't seen much change in that area in the last 30 minutes to 45 minutes. If anything, we've actually seen things perhaps improve with decreased fire activity, so hopefully that means we're moving in the right direction there. But yeah, Butte Meadows, I'm going to be watching, or I'm not going to be watching closely overnight because I have my shift tomorrow morning. I work the morning shift now on the Central Coast for KSBW, and I have to wake up at 3 a.m. for that. So it's already 49 minutes past my bedtime. So I think I probably should wrap this up just so, I still have some energy to cover the fire tomorrow. And I think tomorrow is going to be a big day on this fire because it's going to be a little bit hotter tomorrow, a little bit drier tomorrow. There's not much fire history between where we've seen a lot of the heat today and Mineral, and then looking at the wind forecast for it tomorrow, it actually looks a little less windy than today. But anytime you see gusts over 20 to 25 miles per hour, and you see Mineral right there, that's showing some 20 to 25 mile per hour gusts from the southwest. Tomorrow that's going to try to take some of this active perimeter and push it closer towards Mineral. So that's something we'll be watching closely tomorrow. But main concern right now, still Butte Meadows, but hopefully they've been able to hold it on that firing operation where they were doing a lot of helicopter drops right there. Finally, just in case you're new to the live stream, that's the reason we started this live stream. The hot spot that started around Inskip Hill was pretty concerning for Manton and Shingletown because we had southwesterly winds that were going to try to push it directly towards those communities. 20 miles per hour, temperature around 90, relative humidity around 20%, and they have basically put that spot fire out, which is pretty incredible right there. Also looks like Sky Ranch is still looking good in its protected little pocket. The wind shifting more westerly is actually going to help them as it pushes the fire more to the east, and it, as of right now, looks like it's holding at 36. So Butte Meadows, top concern. Southern area of the fire looking solid in places like Chico, Paradise, Magalia, Forest Ranch. I think they've even changed some of the evacuation orders in Forest Ranch to evacuation warnings. So that's great news there. With that being said, never take my word for it on evacuation warnings and updates because by the time you're watching this, if you're not live, it may have changed. So always go for the most recent information. Then I think what I'm going to try to do, since I believe this live stream is about 3 hours, and nobody's going to want to watch a 3-hour live stream, and I mean, things have changed so much in the last 3 hours that I think what I'm going to do is wrap this video up, and then I'm going to do maybe a 10-minute more concise update, just talking about all of the different information we've been able to kind of acquire over the last 3 hours. So if you're new to the live stream, you can stay tuned for that one, just a concise maybe 10-minute update on what's going on the fire. And then I'll have another update tomorrow morning, hopefully around 9:30. And yeah, I should probably wrap this up though because I gotta eat some dinner, get to bed, wake up at 3 a.m. So hopefully this video was helpful. Stay tuned for the more concise update, and thanks for watching.